Welcome everybody to MACFEST 2023. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Salam. My name is Katarzyna. I'm a member of the MACFEST team. Tell us in the chat, please, where you're watching us from. I'm joining you from France, so bonjour everybody. And today we've got an exciting event, Islam in China. Our host for today is Safiya Florence Ascoli-Ball. She converted to Islam 26 years ago, and she has always been fascinated by Islamic history. She is a French translator and focuses mainly on works that dispel myths about Islam. She translated the book Jesus, Prophet of Islam, as well as Dawah websites and leaflets. She now manages the Islamic History Project, AlHikma. I'm sure she can tell you a little bit more about it and also pronounce it in the right way. And this is a project which her husband started in 2004 when he published Dr. Salah's very first book, The Hidden Debt to Islamic Civilization. She is also a taekwondo black belt, third degree instructor, a Pilates teacher, and she still home educates the youngest of their 4 children in Manchester. Incredible. So now the message to our lovely audience, please first let us know where you're watching us from, and then share your comments, your thoughts, any questions you might have. We will pick them up either during the event or at the end. And on behalf of MACFEST, thank you so much for all your generous donations, which help us create all these wonderful events and keep most of them free. Please subscribe to our newsletter, keep in touch, and follow us also on Eventbrite and social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. And do use our hashtag Spread Honey, Not Hate. So thank you very much, and over to you, Safiya.
Thank you very much, Katarzyna. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings upon you all. Welcome. So as she said, I am welcoming you from Manchester in the UK, but I'm originally French. And so I'm hoping to go there very soon, although I'm very happy that I'm not in the scorching heat at the moment. We do enjoy a little bit of rain here and a bit cooler. I hope it's all going well where you are. We can see that a lot of people coming from all over the world. We've got Mauritius, Tunisia, Cheshire in England, Manchester, obviously. So it's really lovely to see everyone from so many different places. And I hope you'll enjoy our talk. So thank you, MACFEST, again. Thank you, Kesra Sharaz, for the opportunity to contribute once more to your wonderful effort to bring Islamic civilization, history and culture to the wider audience. It's just a fantastic festival, which I encourage you all to continue to follow and to support in whichever way you can. So I would like to introduce Dr. Salah Eddine Al-Djazairi to you. Dr. Salah has lectured and researched at the University of Constantine, Algeria for more than 10 years. He's also worked at the University of Manchester, UMIST, in the field of the history of science. His work is published in academic journals worldwide, and he has written extensively on the subject of Muslim science and civilization. Throughout his career, Al-Djazairi's aim has been to reveal the fallacies in the West's depiction of Islamic civilization and history, and to bring to light the positive contributions of that civilization to the whole world from its inception. Drawing much of his sources from Western historians, he consistently shows their lies, manipulations, and prejudices that have blighted this field of science for hundreds of years, and which have influenced the Western government's foreign policies, justifying first the Crusades, then colonization, and now wars, which have affected the whole of the Muslim world and populations. He never fails, however, to highlight the contributions from a few rare honest historians too, whenever deserved. Bayt AlHikma Productions, then Press, published Dr. Al-Djazairi's first books, starting with the groundbreaking Hidden Debt to Islamic Civilization nearly 20 years ago. Dr. Salah went on to becoming a prolific self-published author, and you can find a description of all his books on our website, baitalhikma.co.uk. And this is where I'd like to have the first, my illustrative slide, please. So this is just basically a screenshot of the page on Islam in China, where you can find the description of this book, Islam in China, and the various volumes. But you also see at the top, we've got a little blog, which I'm trying as much as possible to keep up to date. And then the various publications by Dr. Salah, who are listed in different themes: Islamic science, Islamic history, the Ottomans, North Africa, and Islam in China. This is it's a website in its infancy. I'm just starting single-handedly trying to get this going with some help as well. So we're hoping that at some point it will be able to be fed up a little bit and bring you more information about the work that we're hoping to do, and we're doing as it comes. So please do keep checking the website. We have also now just started an Instagram account, which is very simply at baitalhikma.history. So today, Dr. Salah will be presenting a summary of his findings contained in the book called, very simply, Islam in China. It's a 3-volume book, and it goes from the early days Muslims arrived in China till today in 2020. So it's very, very broad in its spectrum. You may be surprised actually to hear that Islam remains the oldest religion foreign to China. China is in fact the only land where Islam is as old as in its place of birth, the Arab Peninsula. The first volume of Islam in China focuses entirely on the issue of the historical narrative of the subject, which this author considers mostly distorted and even nonsensical. The second volume focuses on the period elapsing between the 7th century, which marked the arrival of Islam in China, and the end of the Mongol presence in the country in 1368. Based on Chinese, Muslim, and Western sources, the author shows that both Mongol rule and its scholarship are equally corrupt. The third and final volume of Islam in China looks at the period elapsing from 1368, with the golden age of Islam and Muslims under the Ming, till the present day, 2020, with the disastrous Qing period lending particular attention to the Muslim rebellions which threatened the extinction of Muslims in China. So if you go again to baitalhikma.co.uk for the link where to buy his books and all of the other works, just do so. You will be taken directly to where you can buy them. So I hope you will enjoy our talk. I cannot wait to listen to Dr. Salah, and it's over to you, Dr. Salah.
Thank you, Safiya. I hope you won't be disappointed. Anyway, the talk today is about the subject Islam in China. We are not going to be able to say everything. That's impossible. We hope to say a little bit, especially quite a lot on the early phases of Islam in China. Now, what I'm going to focus on today, first of all, I will start with the point of very big interest to myself, which is distortions of the subject. Then I will talk about the 2 early dynasties, the Tang and the Song, when Islam prospered in China. Then I will deal with the Mongol phase, and then the Ming dynasty that expelled the Mongols from China. And then I'll move on to the king themselves removed or ended the Ming power. The king, by the way, the spelling is different from the king that we know. It's Q, not K. And during the Qing dynasty, we have some very, very important events that Safiya mentioned, the big wars and disasters that took place in China in the late 19th century and that affected greatly the Muslim presence there. Tens of millions of Muslims died in the civil wars that involved them fighting the king, plus famine and the plague. And we finish for today with the Boxers, and the Boxers are Muslims who fought the Western intrusion in China alongside the Chinese and the rise of nationalist China and then communist China, and in between the fight or the wars against the Japanese in the Second World War, before and down to the Second World War. And then finally, we finish with the rise of communist China from the 1940s until today. That is the later phase, or that latter phase. I have to admit, it's not my speciality. I'm more a medieval historian and later centuries, such as the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th. My knowledge from the 20th to this moment is not that wonderful, so I won't dwell, say, trying to mislead the audience or trying to tell them that I know everything about this phase, especially communist China. You have quite a lot. And in fact, we were joking earlier on about technology. The more you come to our times, to 2020, the less I know. It's today's world is very, very obscure to me. So I'd rather talk about what I know, which is the earlier periods. Now, the reason why I say, or I insist, that I would like to speak about what I know best is, unfortunately, when you deal with the history of Islam, as you deal with Islam, in fact, it's not just that people think that it's only the media and politicians or some people who know nothing about Islam and keep talking or saying nonsense about Islam. Everything about Islam, or I wouldn't say everything, but 80%, 90% of what you find, not just in the media or amongst politicians or some other activists who don't like Islam, is distorted or false. And people don't know that it's scholars as well, or if in fact maybe scholars are the main culprits behind the distortions of Islam. When you go into books on Islam, any subject you pick, whether it is Islam in China, as we are going to see today, or the Crusades, or imperial or colonial period, or any aspect of Islam, you read stuff that is, you would say, put there by illiterate people. I have no, and I think people who read my books or who listen to me in the past, I have no liking whatsoever of modern scholarship of Islam. I wouldn't say 100%, but I would say 80% at best, if not 99%. They neither know their subjects, but they are to turn their hostility to Islam, they turn it into falsifications and distortions. And it's my favorite occupation. In every one of my books, I devote a chapter to distortions of the subject I deal with. With China, I had to devote a whole volume to the distortions, volume 1, because a chapter is not enough. The whole matter of Islam in China is completely distorted from beginning to end. Many of the people who write about the subject or speak about the subject don't know it, especially the early period, whether it goes from the introduction of Islam into China, the first centuries. Many of them don't have any idea when it came first, and they don't believe anyway that the Prophet, peace be upon him, sent a deputation to China. They don't believe Muslim sources. They don't believe Chinese sources, which are in agreement, but they believe their own sources. And unfortunately, they share and they all repeat the same thing. They repeat each other. But you see, I can't go in detail about this aspect of how they distort history by repeating the same fallacies. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to try to avoid to talk as they do about things I don't know. So I will focus today on what I know better than because you see, you have to understand, and everybody understands. No person, no scholar knows everything or is good at everything. The problem with us, we have to give stick to the Muslims, is because the problem comes not from Western historians or other historians who distort. The problem comes from Muslims themselves. Muslims themselves, first, don't read as a rule. Second, they don't write. Intellect is, I would say, again, I'm going to sound controversial, intellect is not in its brilliant phase in the Muslim world today. I would rather say it's dead, completely dead. You only need to look at the internet and you see the atrocities that exist there, and barely any Muslim scholarship to counter the fallacies, the distortions, the lack of knowledge. So it's not I, as a writer or as an author or as a person who is going to correct everything and going to tell you everything. I will tell what I tell. It might be good in places, it would be imperfect in many others, but this is what we have. No person is going to correct the situation. We need Muslims to do their bit, their part. We need the involvement of Muslim scholarship to at least correct some of the fallacies, some of the things. Now you find, for instance, it's generally found in many universities for talking about Islam, that many scholars deny the existence of the Prophet, peace be upon him. You find any involvement of Muslims to counter that in a rational manner? No. You find people denying the existence that Mecca existed at the time of the Prophet. Alhamdulillah, we've got scholars such as David King who counters this lie with very, very important. But David King and a few other historians apart, such as Professor John Hobson in Sheffield and a few others, Muslims themselves don't shine maybe in just few areas, such as economics, where we can cite a couple of names, but otherwise, Muslim counteracting distortions of Islam or any subject related to Islam remains extremely poor, if barely existent. So personally, I don't criticize the distorters and those who write anything, teach anything about Islam. I put the blame solely or 90% on Muslims themselves. They are responsible for their faith, their culture, their civilization, their history to be so messed up. Now, of course, as I said, I'm going to do my bit. I'm not going to correct the whole history of China today. Forget about it. I'm not going to say everything either. I'm not capable of it. So let me go give you an idea. I talk mainly about the Tang and the Song at first. Tang is T-A-N-G, the Tang dynasty, and the Song dynasty, like in Song. It's under these two dynasties that China discovered Islam. The first contact was made at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, when he sent envoys to rulers, to the empires surrounding the Muslim world, Persia, Egypt, and so on. And here there is a bit of controversy about the first envoy to China. Some people say Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, some name others and so on. We can't go into the detail. There is big controversy and conflict over names. And again, the issue hasn't been studied at all. This first contact is supposed to have taken place in the year 629. Chinese sources say it. And it confirms exactly Muslim sources that speak about the Prophet, peace be upon him, sending envoys to those emperors and rulers at around that time, 628, 629. And that was the first contact. But the main contact wasn't just diplomatic. In fact, after this first envoy, there followed others sent by, in particular by Khalif Uthman. He sent these envoys in 650, and the Chinese sent back also their envoys to the Muslim world, and they started describing the whole Muslim world at the time. So we have very good descriptions of the Muslim world by Chinese, early Chinese historians of the Tang dynasty, later on followed by those of the Song dynasty. So what we do, I'm not going to go in details what these exchanges were all about. The main thing here we get is that Chinese sources confirm Muslim sources. If we put Chinese and Muslim sources together, sometimes they complete the voids, because sometimes there are voids in reports and in counts and so on. But when you look in detail at the sources from both countries, you find they complement each other very, very nicely indeed. And this is in total contradiction to what is claimed by scholarship of today, including some famous encyclopedias. I won't mention them here because I do mention them in my books because I take responsibility for that, but I'm not going to involve MACFEST in case they get in trouble for that. So, including some famous encyclopedias, including here in Britain, they categorically state that Islam was unknown and this and that, and they deny the accuracy of the Muslim sources, and they attack what these sources say. And in fact, they even deny the existence, as I said, of the Prophet and of Mecca and early Islamic history. They completely erase it. And this is not just in books, but also in courses and so on at university, which is current today, 2023. But when you look at Muslim sources and Chinese sources, they contradict fundamentally what these supposed scholars tell you. So, and this is another. Now, these early Chinese sources confirm nearly 100% what Muslim sources say and Muslim sources do. So we have, contrary to scholarship, to trust fundamentally Muslim sources, which they reject in respect to this issue and in respect to many other things. Now, what we have to know also, as Safiya mentioned, is that the oldest mosque in the world that we have today is in China after the Mosque of Medina. The Mosque of Medina was first. It was a mosque built by the Prophet, and it was followed by the second mosque. It was in China. We put a picture of it's on the cover of the book, and if we can have the picture of that mosque, I hope Tom or whoever could put it on the screen. That mosque is the second mosque in Islam. Of course, it was different in architecture. This is a rebuilt structure, but in the place and in the setting and so on. This is the second mosque in Islam. This shows and proves that Islam has been present in China from the early times, from around 629 to 630 or maybe 600 early 30s. Nobody knows precisely, until today. This is the longest presence in any part of the world than anywhere, and also, except in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the oldest, and then after Saudi Arabia is China. The only times you had two interruptions in the vitality of Islam in China, you had it on two occasions. That during the Mongol invasion first, and again, we will return to the Mongol presence to again show that scholarship and Muslims themselves know nothing. Islam didn't thrive during the Mongol invasion. Islam collapsed during the Mongol invasion. It's only in the scholarship of today and amongst Muslims who are gullible to follow such scholarship, to whatever naive, if not to say, to use another word, who believe and who states that Islam thrived under the Mongols and that the Mongols promoted Islam. They never did. The Mongols destroyed the Islamic presence, whether in the Muslim world itself or in China. We'll return to this. Now, we leave this distortion bit because I might get back to it once I talk about the other parts. We get to the Song and dynasties. Again, we stay with them a bit. It was the main expansion of Islam took place in during these two dynasties via trade mainly. Already before Islam, there was trade between involving Arabs, and mostly Persians were not Muslims at the time, to China. So the Chinese and the people, Persians and the Arabs, already dealt with each other. Some historians, you will find the names in my book. I can't cite every name, every detail here whilst I talk, but you can find details if you are interested in the subject and if you like my books, that is, in my books. Then I gave all the details, the sources, of whatever I say here, and precisely even the publications and so on. So the Chinese, the Persians, and the Arabs dealt with each other before Islam, but it was only after Islam and when the Muslim state got established and the Persians became Muslim. And because, again, there is a very important point, the early Muslim, if we can call them leaders or rulers, beginning with the Prophet himself and the first Caliph, they were all traders. And so Islam promoted trade because from the start, and that's why, because in the Quran you find quite a lot about trading and this and the business transactions and all the rest, and also in the Hadith. And the Muslims had already always, how can we say, welcomed and encouraged trade. It's in the Muslim gene. And again here, sorry, I deviate a little bit. We have a German scholar called Benedict Kohler, who attributes the rise of the whole modern economic system to Islam. And this is no surprise, because the early Muslim leaders of the community, from the Prophet down to Abu Bakr, Uthman, and so on, they were all traders. And they promoted it and they established the rules, and you have many things that do with trade, business, and so on, precisely dating from the early days of Islam. And that's Islam that impacted on the rise of the modern economic system, finances, and so on. So thanks to this trade, the Muslim community expanded considerably in China during the Song and the Tang first and the Song dynasties. With these dynasties elapsed from sometimes around 400 CE until about 1200, the two dynasties. So Muslim community grows so strong, so powerful, so wealthy, so numerous, with so many mosques, so many towns and cities in China, that China nearly became Muslim by the 12th century. And then what happened, and here we move to the Mongols, and again here where we contradict what modern scholarships followed by many, you just need to check the internet, many Muslims who talk utter nonsense, including scholars who talk that Mongols promoted Islam. I would like to have the map on the Mongol invasions, please, on the screen, because this way it would help me, because I can only see Safiya on the screen. And we have the map, please, on the screen. I don't know whether there's somebody, no, not, this is the mosque. This is the second mosque in Islam after that of Medina. The next one, please. The map. Yeah, this is a map. Can we stay with this bit? Because I need to explain something so that we resolve this Mongol business once and for all, because people make a complete hash of matter. You see the Mongols, they were from somewhere here, Mongolia, and you see the arrows in their invasions. The Mongols who came here to the south, Ilkhanat, Iran, they came in, and it is these Mongols who destroyed Islam. The Mongols to the north, later on the Golden Horde, they converted to Islam, and they became the allies of the Muslims. The Mongols in China were also the greatest, the Yuan dynasty, they took the name, were the very big enemies of Islam. The rulers here, we talk here about the 1250s in the Ilkhanat of Iran, was Hulagu. Hulagu was, at the time, the Crusades were taking place in the Muslim world. And millions of Muslims were killed by the Crusaders and the Crusade invasions. It's a subject we are not going to go into. The Mongols came in assistance to the Crusaders here, because Hulagu himself, his wife was Christians, his generals were Christians, and they were all pro-Crusaders. They slaughtered millions of Muslims in Iraq, in Syria, and in other parts of the Muslim world here in the West. The Mongols in China slaughtered millions of Chinese and Muslims and established, because the ruler in China, Kubilai, also had affinities with the Christian Crusaders and so on. For instance, you all hear about Marco Polo and so on visiting China. Marco Polo and other missionaries and so on wanted supported the establishment of the Mongols in China because it was precisely a pro-Crusader, pro-Christian rule. So Kubilai in China was the brother of Hulagu in Iran, and they were both haters of Islam. Now, where do you find the literature that today's scholarship uses to tell you that the Mongols were favorable to Islam? The people who supported the Mongols in the Muslim world were the people like Rashid ad-Din and the Juwayni brothers, Ibn Tiktaka, and so on. All of them enemies of Islam, especially Sunni Islam, that the Mongols. And this is the problem. The scholars use these couple of Rashid ad-Din and Juwayni, who both hated Islam, and then they say they were just supposedly common. Juwayni, for instance, delighted. He wrote great deal. You can find his works that have been translated into English. I don't know about French, where he delights at the killing of millions of Muslims, including the whole population of Baghdad. Juwayni praises it. He loved. He was even present when the people of Baghdad were being slaughtered. In Baghdad, the Mongols killed at minimum 800,000 people. That is in Baghdad alone. And imagine the other parts of Islam. And in fact, had it not been for the Mamluks who stopped the Mongols in Cairo, as in the map, the Mongols were about to wipe out the whole Muslim community. And Kubilai did the same in China. He didn't slaughter maybe as many Muslims as his brother Hulagu did, but he did completely break Muslim power in China. Now, both Hulagu and Kubilai, who praised them, they had these lackeys, Rashid ad-Din, Juwayni brother, and others in China, such as somebody, Ahmed, and few others, who praised the rule because they were forced and they benefited. And historians today, in 2000, including in 2023, in their courses, in their books and so on, use these sources of these servants of the Mongols to say, look how the Mongols served Islam. No, you have to look at the sources, because if we look at Muslim sources, such as Ibn al-Athir and many others of people, they saw the slaughters committed by the Mongols and the destruction. The Mongols killed so many millions of Muslims that even some historians speak of climate change, mini climate change at the time. Whole cities were wiped out, structures, everything. The Muslim civilization was nearly wiped out. It was, at the time, as Ibn Khaldun says, Allah sent us the Mamluks. The Mamluks it was who stopped and expelled the Mongols from the Muslim world, whilst in China, and here we move to the Ming, it was the Ming who expelled the Mongols at more or less the same time, whilst the Mongols eliminated the Mamluks eliminated the Mongols of the Muslim world. The Ming, in alliance with the Muslims of China, removed the Mongols of China. So we had, and this happened at the same time, this simultaneous expulsion of the Mongols from both West, Iran, Ilkhanate here, and from China. And so the Ming, we forget for a moment what happened in Mamluk, the Mamluk rule in the Islamic world. We focus on China. It was under the Ming that Islam witnessed another revival, and the numbers started rising again, and Islamic power started growing again. And here we have to say again, and to contrary to what you find in history books or in history schools today, many Ming rulers had either affinities for Islam or were Muslims themselves. And what also happened during Ming rule, all the positions of power were given to Muslims. And there are many famous Muslims as governors, military officers, generals in commerce, in culture, and so on. But we have one particular Muslim we mention here, his name was Zheng He or Chang Ho. Can we have, and Zheng He or Chang Ho was a Muslim. He built, he was an admiral. He built the most powerful navy that was known, that had ever been known. I think if we could have a little picture on the navy of Zheng Ho or Zheng He, Chang Ho. There it is. I mean, it's a drawing, but any of such boats, especially this one, the big one in the middle, was 10 times bigger than Christopher Columbus ships. When you put Christopher Columbus ships next to this ship in the middle, they looked very tiny in comparison. The Chinese fleet at the time was the most impressive ever seen, with its numbers, its size, and what it had. And this fleet controlled the whole area. It was the power of the time. Zheng He or Chang Ho made many pilgrimages to Mecca and so on, and he promoted Islam in many parts, including in Indonesia and so on. In fact, you find some of the best works on Zheng He these days. You find them by Indonesians. There are some very good Indonesian young scholars who are really doing good work on Zheng He. Quite again, you will find the references in my books. I can't again cite everything, but if you want these details, you seek them there. At least you can look at the bibliographies if you are not interested in the content of the book itself or the books themselves. So during the Ming, as I said, again, trade, science, culture, all of them influenced by Muslims, grew, expanded considerably, and the number of Muslims again expanded. The mosques were constructed everywhere, and again, under the Ming, China nearly became Muslim, except that there took place another invasion of China, this time by the king. The king were partly Mongol, but they were Manchus as well, from Manchuria. And they came and they invaded China, and they destroyed Ming power. And the king established themselves in China from around the 17th century until the early 20th century. It was under king rule that the biggest tragedy occurred to Muslims when they were involved in extreme violence. They rose against king rule, and this led to civil wars, terrible civil wars, in which millions, if not tens of millions of Muslims were slaughtered by the king and their allies, because the king were armed by Western powers. I will explain in a minute why, with sophisticated artillery. In fact, Muslims were encouraged to rebel, and when they rebelled, the same powers gave artillery to the king to slaughter the Muslims and their villages, their towns, everything. And then on top of that, you had the plague, famines, and so on. And nobody knows how many Muslims and Chinese peasants died. You might find some details in some films. I've seen a couple of Chinese films dealing with that period where people died like really, you have no, I mean, it's incredible. No famines, no plague, how can I put it? Catastrophe, the like of which had never been seen, as happened in China in the late, from say around 1860s, 1870s, and 1970s. In fact, the Chinese called that period the century of humiliation, because on top of the plague, on top of the famine, on top of the war, what they had the opium problem, which was introduced by Western powers in China, and again, it affected millions of Chinese. And whenever the Chinese rose against the introduction of opium into China, Western powers came and gave a beating to the Chinese, because at the time China was extremely weak, and the West was at its peak at the time. And in fact, Western powers were so powerful and China was so weak, and going through all these wars, the opium catastrophe, the plague and so on, that China was about to be a partition between Western powers. Can we have the map, the caricature of the partitioning of China, please? I think you will find in Wikipedia, I don't know whether I'm being heard here. Can we have the drawing of the partitioning of China by Western powers? No, they are not listening, or there is a little. No, not this one. This is the moment. The one where you have five rulers dividing China between themselves, 5 or 6 of them. Can you move on, please? Not this one. That's the one. Yeah, here you have the Chinese at the back is protesting, but you have the British, the Germans, the Russians, the Americans that I don't know why they are not here, and the Japanese and the French there, the lady with the tricolor, they're standing, partitioning China. This is found in, there is another picture you find in Wikipedia with the American Uncle Sam standing, and these guys here, Victoria, of course, guys, and other lady rulers, Queen Victoria to the left. They represent France as the symbol of freedom and civilization and all the rest. She is the representation of France, dividing China between themselves. So this is what, and the Chinese guy is protesting at the partitioning of his country. And that was the time that the Chinese spoke of the century of great humiliation, because the country nearly disappeared. It was so weak. The Chinese were then being addicted to opium and all the rest, and being kicked and beaten anytime whenever they angered anyone, and their country was being split altogether by the Western powers. This leads us to the next picture. Then I'll start with the next picture, the boxers, please. Here, the consul braves. So in 1900, these consul braves, who are Muslims, as you see, again, it's another thing which is you can't find in scholarship today, which is denied, which is missed. I found a very good work on the consul braves and the Muslim role in an American thesis dating from 1906. But this thesis is never mentioned. Nobody refers to it. Nobody mentions it. Scholarship uses the sources it likes and ignores what he disagrees with it. But alhamdulillah, if you research, you find good sources. But the good sources all date from the old times. There is nothing, barely anything good about Islam in China or anything on China today, whether amongst scholars, politicians, or the media. It's terrible anyway. But if you look into the old sources, you will find some very good sources. And an American thesis, again, I mentioned in my book, volume 3, you will find the title there, deals with this particular episode. The consul braves, or the Muslims, it was they who were behind the Boxer Revolution. It was the Boxers who initiated the Chinese regaining of power against the, the partitioning of their country and the Western dominated rule in China. The Boxers were defeated, but the Chinese nationalists took or were influenced by them, and then arose to start bringing back China into the modern world. Again, the details I dealt with little here, no need to go into the details, and the Chinese nationalist history is very rich, and it shows you how little by little the Chinese started removing Western domination and Qing domination of China and build China, the Republic of China. And then there arose the communists, and then first of all, first they were associated with the nationalists, and then they split from the nationalists, and they started, there was a war between the nationalists and the communists, which eventually ended in the communist victory, and China becoming communist after the Second World War. Now, and before then, Muslims had a final contribution in China. I would like to go to the picture on the Muslims fighting the Japanese. Here, this is the Muslim cavalry. It was a very, very good tool that helped China defeat the Japanese when they invaded China. And later on, Muslim cavalry played a major part in the communist victory. They were mostly the cavalry of the Chinese Red Army. Here you have a very good American author. Again, his name I mentioned, I'm so sorry, I can't remember every name. I can't mention every name. I can't mention every book. I can't mention every source. But there is an American author who was pro-communist, who went to China and who describes the Muslim involvement in the liberation of China and even in the rise of communist China. The reasons why, because at the time Muslims were, according to communist literature, exploited as much as the other Chinese, and they were indeed, there were some very powerful, rich Muslim oligarchs who took all the wealth and they overtaxed the rest of the Muslim population. And so many young Muslims fought alongside the communists, and that's what you have in the end, leading to the modern China. As I mentioned at the start, this is from communist China is not my subject. I know barely anything about it. I'm more into the earlier centuries about which I talked, and I can, of course, I haven't mentioned everything. I can't say everything, but maybe the audience can point to some issues or how do you say, stir my memory, and then we can discuss them in the question and answer session. Thank you.
MashaAllah, I'm speechless. I've known you for 20 years. I have to say, every time I sit, that's it. I go into another world, and all this information that you have at the top of your head, we are so blessed to have you. I have to say, may you continue to have a good health and continue to contribute such amazing knowledge, mashallah, that you have. I hope everybody enjoyed this. It is a completely underlooked topic. I have to say, I am very grateful that Kesra chose this to commission this to us as well, because I may have suggested something else, something a bit more kind of common to talk about when we talk about, you know, Islamic civilization. And she thought, oh, let's talk about Islam in China. And I said, yes, of course. We never hear about Islam in China. There's so little we know. Some of our attendees here might be familiar with the Turkish series called Kuruluş Osman or İdris Ertuğrul or Alparslan. Those series now start to tackle these issues you were talking about, the difference between the pro-Muslim and the Muslim converts among the Mongols and those who were not, and how they actually fought each other, some supporting Osman, some, you know, obviously fighting against him. And so it is starting slowly now. It's only, although we think everybody watches this series, you know, it's only such a niche audience. So hopefully at some point we will have more of those productions done where the general population will be able to access. There's a couple of good programs on Netflix as well, so it is coming slowly, but yeah, still so much work.
Thank you, Safiya, for saying bringing this out. And this is the problem. You see, it took, and this is again the problem, it took only a couple of documentaries or historical to show this big difference between the Mongols fighting on Muslim side, the Golden Hole, and the Mongols fighting. The problem in scholarship, and even in many Muslim websites, you find they amalgamate all the Mongols together. Oh, the Mongols love this, and they confuse whether on purpose or because they don't know. And this is the problem. You don't know sometimes. If they don't know, they shouldn't be dealing with the subjects. Because you see, you don't know something, not only you are telling a lie, especially in fact, when it comes to Islam. If you don't know, don't say anything. Because it's not just you tell a lie, you are misleading. And in Islam, misleading is worse than anything else. You don't know, so I don't know. Allah, my power ends here. This is, I am not an encyclopedia. No scholar is an encyclopedia. No human being. Only Allah knows everything. And this is the arrogance of many. They talk about subjects they don't know. They lie, they mislead, and unfortunately, you find it in scholarship. And scholars use the only sources that are pro-Mongol, Juwayni, Rashid ad-Din, and maybe one, Ibn Tiktaka, and so on. And then they generalize it all. And they never do, and this is the credit of the makers of the documentaries you just mentioned, or they have and they have showed this difference. And this is why I blame Muslims. Muslims should be making more of these documentaries, more of these series, more films, more books, more internet. But unfortunately, at the moment you click the internet, it's dead. Very, very rare exceptions. I mean, you have to credit a couple of Muslim websites, such as MuslimHeritage.com, that tries to do bit. Of course, we don't always follow, take everything or agree with 100, but at least they try. But apart from that, the Muslim world is asleep. And then when they read or come across lies, they get upset. Oh no, of course you will be upset. You have yourself to right to make your own history known. The truth about Islam, about, as you mentioned, one documentary, couple of documentaries showed this big distinction. Go now, check scholarship of today in 2020. They make no difference. Oh, Mongols promoted Islam. Mongols brought brilliance to Islam. Mongols this, Mongols. It's in books. Just pick anyone published in 2022, 23, 21. Go to courses and you will read this nonsense.
I think this is what you say, is that all of this scholars, it's a bit like how the internet works now, the TikTok and with the algorithm. You know, you start watching something, you get more of the similar outputs sort of suggested to you, and you think this is the only view, but you don't know where to research maybe other points of view. And it's the same with scholarship. You kind of repeat the scholars you hear about, you see the most, but they're not necessarily the ones. So we need more people like you. I know one of your hopes to leave as a legacy is to help new scholars to come out and to know how to research the right truth, because as you say, if you really dig and try and look for something, that you will find the source. You just have to know where to look exactly. So hopefully there'll be a stage where you'll be able to share not just the content of your knowledge, but also your methodology, how you actually manage to find all of these sources that are out there ultimately to be found.
I tell you what, Safiya, for instance, if you take, to give you an idea, and it's going to surprise you of how poor scholarship of today is. Again, there are a couple of exceptions. For instance, in Australia, we have somebody called Donald Leslie, who writes some very good books on Islam in China. But Donald Leslie and one or two accepted, the others, they write utter nonsense, especially in articles in encyclopedias, and utter, complete nonsense. Now, to have an idea, you read what Christian missionaries wrote in the 19th century. They were there, thousands of them, if not tens of thousands in China, spreading Christianity. They had better knowledge of Islam than the scholars of today. So if you want to know about 19th century, including the wars and including the death of millions of, go to that Christian literature of the, why did they know? Because at the time they were fearing China might become Muslim and they wanted to counter. So they were spreading Christianity. So they wanted to know about Islam. They produced, you take in publication, this one I remember, called The Muslim World, this Christian missionary. You find the best articles on Muslims and Islam in China than you find in any scholarly book today. Which are absolute, as I said, maybe one couple of exceptions, utter trash. I don't know, I mean, it surprises me, the levels, but unfortunately, it's not in relation to this subject, it's in relation to every subject, whatever they deal with. Scholars of recent time, again, exceptions aside, especially those who are known. I mean, I mentioned some exceptions in my books. The stuff is so bad, so distorted. It's again like mainstream media today. You are not enlightened. You don't know the truth. I mean, this is why I'm having problems today with the word 2023. You can't get to the truth anymore because the things, common sense, you use common sense and you use what's written in the media, what's said in the media, what's said, and the huge conflicts. As far as I'm concerned, I just give up. I can't understand the word 2023. To me, it's a huge book. And that's why I find refuge in history, because in history, at least you have sources of the time and they tell you, you put them together, you put Muslim, Christian, Chinese, Jewish, and so on, and you get some truth. You can't rely on Muslim sources only. This is the mistake that also other people, Muslims, make. They only use Muslim sources. No, you have to use, especially if you're talking about this subject or the Crusades or whatever, use Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Byzantine, everything, and then you will see where they complement each other, where they contradict each other. And then you let your readers or your audience know, here sources contradict each other. And you give both views or three views, whatever, you let your audience, at least you give the authors or the sources, and you let your, but you don't do like today, this is the truth and that's it. No, you have to, as a scholar, and why I blame scholarship is they deny Muslim sources. I mean, some of them today completely, they accuse all Muslim sources, including the Quran, including of being falsified, this, that. Some of them I came across, they know nothing about Islam, and yet the author says he knows what the Prophet, peace be upon him, was thinking 14 centuries ago.
Yeah.
How could
so I think we have to there's a big work to be done. So I'm sorry, I have to kind of go to the questions and answers now, because we actually have quite a few, and I hope we can go through most of them. So I'm not going to go necessarily in order, but go those that are the broadest and the most sort of relevant to the topic. So one question is, one person is saying that you mentioned that Islam has been in China for a very long time, and they're wondering if there's a particular reason why it was taken up in China so soon after Islam formed, apart from geographical connections to the Muslim world and trade, but whether it was because there were similarities between Islamic values and that of traditional Chinese values that made the adoption of the religion more seamless. What would be your explanation?
I think it's there are first of all, the Chinese have never been hostile. They were not hostile to the Muslim presence. They were doing trade. Chinese liked, in fact, before, to give you an idea on this, you have to go to the late Middle Ages when, what's his name, Albuquerque, the Portuguese, made an eruption into the Indian Ocean. Before the late 15th century, the period corresponding to the Renaissance, the Chinese, the Hindus, the Muslims, and people of the region were engaged in intensive trade exchanges. But when the Portuguese came, they broke everything. They destroyed the whole Indian Ocean trade. There is a very good scholar here, I have to admit, he is an exceptional scholar I admire, at Sheffield University. His name is John Hobson, Professor John Hobson. And there is an American Professor Casal, also, who is very, very good. These people explain the issues, how the relationship between Chinese and Muslim trade exchanges, cultural exchange, the Hindus, were always for the best. Competition open. But when the Portuguese and other Christian parties, it changed. It became piracy, destruction of the Muslim navy, of the whatever exchange, the factories, the system, and they took, instead of bringing value to the relationship, they destroyed the whole established system. And
so basically, the fact that basically Islam spread fairly seamlessly through through China, those parts of China, was because the Chinese didn't really have a problem with whether you'd be Muslim or whether you're Buddhist, Taoist, or whatever. As long as you did your trade, you minded your business. This is what you mean, basically, as a culture that didn't have a problem with other cultures.
As long as you didn't interfere with the politics of the empire, you didn't start causing problems. They would care, you establish, you build your mosque, it was illicit. Whereas, for instance, if you compare the relationship between, let's say, the Muslim world, or especially North Africans and France trading, when the Algerian, in the year 1600, when the Algerian and the Jewish delegation went to Marseille to establish commercial links, the delegation was slaughtered in the streets of Marseille because they were considered. Whereas that was in 1600 something. Whilst in China, they have been trading Muslims, Jews, everybody, the Hindus, whoever trade. You see, it's a completely different thing. And you have to admit one thing. Again, this is not known. Islam spread in Malaysia, in China, in Indonesia, and parts around there, not because people went and spread the text and so on. It was mainly the behavior of Muslims. The behavior of Muslims in those days, again, I'm sorry, I might cause some to be angry, was hundreds of times much better than Muslims of today. Maybe me included. I'm not behaving as good, I don't know. But it was, so the local populations, the Chinese, the Indonesians, the Malaysians who were not Muslim, when they saw and dealt with these Muslim traders and first travelers, they were impressed. Take, for instance, cannibalism. Cannibalism was far spread in countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, and Muslims ended it. Alcohol, you see, even in China, the addiction to opium and so on. So you see, it was such a thing. They brought with them honesty, good values, good behavior. It was completely different. I mean, you see, I won't criticize all Muslims of today. I would criticize myself first. I need to improve myself. But the difference between Muslims today are not a model to others. That's it. The behavior is completely different. You don't see Muslims say, MashaAllah, look at the cleanliness, look at the discipline, look at the honesty, and so on and so forth. Whilst at the time, that was the case. So wherever Muslims went, by example, the others were impressed. The Portuguese and later on the Dutch and the British went in with artillery and power and front, but people didn't convert to Christianity. They stayed with Islam because it's everything is in the behavior, is in the values, is in the image you convey. But if you at the time, Muslims conveyed a wonder, and that's what made Indonesians follow Islam, many Africans, many Malaysians. Again, this contradicts what you hear today, that Islam was spread by force. This is a lie. You have countries there, not a single Muslim soldier set foot. The Chinese, the Muslim soldiers, in fact, helped the Chinese emperor to defeat his enemies. And then he allowed them to stay because their behavior was exemplary. And they themselves, that was early in the 8th century, and then they converted hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Chinese to Islam.
That's very inspiring and a very good reminder as well. It reminds me of the Muslims in Al-Andalus at the time. This is why we have names, Fatima, now seeped through Christian, Spanish and Portuguese culture. That was because they wanted their children to emulate the Muslims who were such great examples. So to go back to China, and another of our attendees would like to know if you could, if you had an idea of the geographical distribution of Chinese Muslims and whether there were any particular areas or cities where they were particularly strong.
At some point, unlike today, Muslims were more numerous in the south of China, southwest, where the traders established themselves. They were established, in fact, all over China. Here, I recommend people to go to that publication. Christian Missionaries made the best study because they wanted to know where Muslims were. And they had numbers, mosques, everything, because as I said, they feared that China might become Muslim. I do write a bit, I do use this thing in my volume 3 of Islam in China. And people can go back to this Christian missionary, and it gives them all the details. How many families, how many mosques, what they were doing. They knew everything about Muslims. And you can see that Muslims were spread. But because of the war that took place in the 19th century, as I said, during King rule, many thousands of Muslim villages and cities were completely wiped out. They died from fighting, they died from hunger, and they died from the plague. And they all took place at the same time. It was, and the same thing, millions of Chinese died as well as a result. It was a terrible phase. How China survived that phase is incredible. From around the 1840s down to 1900, it was a terrible, or maybe even you would say 1920s. It was a terrible phase for China. Really.
So basically, at the time, Muslims, you could say they were found pretty much anywhere.
Everywhere. As I said, you have, this is again why you need to ignore historians of today who talk nonsense. You have to go to the sources of the time. You read sources of the time by Westerners, the missionaries, the ambassadors, whoever. They will tell you that China might become Muslim. They were fearing, in fact, it was their greatest fear that China might become Muslim. And this is they armed all those envoys, those mercenaries. They armed Muslims with some guns and so on, encouraged them to start a war, and then they gave the king all the artillery, all the model to slaughter the Muslims. So, and this is what precisely happened. The plan worked. The Muslims, especially Yaqub Khan he was a big Muslim powerful figure. He got he wanted his independence, and then there were other parts, and it ended in mass slaughter, mass devastation. As I said, if not tens of millions, it's at least millions of Chinese Muslims who died. And then the missionaries, one of them Australian, he writes, he was traveling across China and he was describing the devastation. He is a very good source of the deserted, the dead populations, the emptied population. And that missionary also describes the effect of opium in China. He blames the Chinese for it. They blame the Chinese for the opium addiction. Once you see that the opium was imposed by Britain at the time, because the British grew opium in India and they wanted China to use it. So this was the thing. But the Chinese had to use it, and tens of millions became addicted and died from the opium addiction. And this is why the Chinese speak of that period as the century of humiliation. It was terrible for them. China was in a worse state than the worst, like say, Somalia today, or much, much worse.
Okay, so we have one other question here, which is a bit more specific. I read it as it is. How important for the spread of Islam was the Battle of Talas between the Abbasids and the Tang dynasty?
Not much. It had what it did, barely had anything. What the good effect of it was, after the Battle of Talas, the Muslim soldiers and those who were with them saw or came across the production of paper in China, and they brought the technology to the Muslim world, which led.
Would you give us a bit of context, because I don't think everyone will become.
If I get it right, it's 751 or 752 Christian era, or maybe a bit later, because the Abbasids came to power in 750. That there was this battle. It had already by then hundreds of thousands of Muslims had established themselves in China. via trade.
Talas is in China. Is that the battle? I'm not
No, it was between, it's somewhere in Central Asia, the frontier between, because the Muslims were expanding in. So this battle took place. It was the only battle. It had barely no impact whatsoever, good or bad or anything. It's the Muslims had already built their mosques long before then, during the Caliphate of Uthman, which was 651. The exchange of embassies between the Caliph Uthman and the Chinese date from 651, 652. So it was at least a century earlier. By then, the Chinese had written, visited, known about the Muslim world. The Battle of Talas was just really nothing whatsoever. As I said, the only impact was to bring paper from China to the Muslim world. And even
still quite important.
Eventually, it was crucial. I don't know how the details, how it happened, because I haven't gone into the very details. But if you look, if you search, you will find how it happened. And then the Muslims brought paper to Baghdad, and there was established the first factory to produce paper, which led to the book explosion and to the scientific explosion, because paper as a means for writing is essential. And anyone who tells you about libraries and things existing before Islam is talking nonsense. Well, because you see, to produce parchment, parchment is not an easy thing to write on or to produce and so on. And people only need to read an excellent historian I really like, Jonathan Bloom, who is in America. Jonathan Bloom writes about paper industry, and he explained, and then you realize how the introduction of paper from China to the Muslim world was the real intellectual revolution. Because
it is probably something that, if people are interested, you probably discuss it as into more details in your other books, The Golden Age and Decline of Islamic Civilization, or The Hidden Debt to Islamic Civilization. If I remember well, there was a lot of sort of these new technologies being discussed in those, and you have other books called Our Civilization. So
yeah, I think
interested in those topics, they can read further there.
I think in the book Our Civilization, I explain a great deal on this, the role of paper, but I think the guy, the real excellent scholar people, in fact, it's two scholars, it's Jonathan Bloom, and after him there is another scholar called Maya Schatz-Miller. Again, I mentioned them in my books. They really produced a great deal on this issue. And to be fair, Jewish writers on these issues are the best, because both Jonathan Bloom and Maya Schatz-Miller are Jews, and they specialize because they know about these things quite well. You find in their work, they know about the industry quite a lot, and other industries as well, ceramics and so on. That is, if you are interested in economics. By the way, as we talk about economics, I mentioned German scholar Benedict Koller, but also there are two Muslim very good ones, Ghazanfar, I don't know what's his name, Ghazanfar something, he's excellent, and both of them Professor Ghazanfar and Professor Islahi. These also wrote great things. So if you want to know about, because paper was an industry, so anything to do with industry, you have to go to Benedict Koller, to Professor Ghazanfar and Professor Islahi, and in relation to paper specifically, Jonathan Bloom and Maya Schatz-Miller. And you find a great deal, and you understand that without the Islamic role, especially in inventing the book as we know it today, there would never be, or there would have never been, an intellectual revolution. It's the Muslims, this on its own, because the inventors of the book, of the public library, of the libraries, the very sources of civilization and learning are Muslims, are the Muslims. And today, to have an idea that it's the end of civilization, libraries are being phased out the world over, destroyed. The books are being destroyed. They are being replaced by knowledge on the internet, electronic crap. So anybody writes any nonsense, it's knowledge. The books contain stupid things as well, but at least with the book, you have You can go, you can explore, but the internet dominates you. You click, it comes, what first click, what the people behind the internet throw at you, news or art, so it's the truth. You don't go as in the library and search and look and find. And this is the big disaster. It's the end of civilization today.
And it's also a bit ephemeral as well in some ways, because you get all the feeds or your videos or whatever get pushed down, and people don't go into the older stuff. They just want the latest, most
exactly. As summed up, especially Muslims being not wonderful book readers in the first place, they pick anything on the internet and they believe it. 99% that you find first page on the internet is stupid, cretin nonsense, lies. You have to look. You have, if you
critical.
If you are interested in knowledge and you're interested in the truth, you have to search. You have to think. You have to use your common sense. And again, these things are recommended in the Quran. But if you sit and if you listen to the first guy or whoever talking to you because they are with the BBC or CNN, or you're just, or a known scholar or a popular scholar or an award-winning scholar, then you are being misled. You go, you look, and preferably you always go to the sources of the time, regardless if they are Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Byzantines. You have, because the good thing about you see Christian, Jewish, and whatever sources, Byzantine, Crusader sources, because even the Crusaders, they don't like Muslims, but you find a lot of truth. As Muslims, we shouldn't be interested whether a historian or scholar likes us or not. What matters is the truth. Because somebody who likes you but who doesn't know the truth will mislead you. And this is what's happening. Because he is an ignorant person himself. He doesn't. But somebody, crusader, who writes about the Crusades, tells you more truth than all scholars of the Crusades today. You pick the sources that you find, right? You pick some old French sources. There is French historian Grousset, René Grousset. He hates Islam and Muslims, but his books on the Crusades are the best. Not because he likes Muslim, but because he tells you some true facts which you can't find in historians' work today. This is the problem.
I mean, I suppose for political reasons, to political decisions, they needed to tell exactly how things were to be able to make those decisions, I suppose.
No, you see, today they play with this politically correct thing. They like, you see, you find the worst authors I found. I'll make you this, maybe I'm deviating a bit. The worst authors of Islam today are those who pretend to speak Arabic and they put these diacritic marks, you see, between words, and instead of telling you Islam, they say Islam, and they try to sound more Arabic, more Islamic, more wonderful. They are the worst, the nonsense, the cretin things, the lies they convey. I better listen to the most anti-Muslim person and pick the truth from him. Even, and he hates Muslims and he says it, at least, but not pick these people. They try to sound, they give you these sources, you know, complicated, these Arabic names, these Arabic expressions, sometimes in Arabic, and you say, MashaAllah, which is just powder, it's smoke in the eyes. So you have to use, not to be afraid to use Christian, Jewish, Byzantine, Armenian, whatever sources, but use the sources of the time.
Thank you. So we have to move on to possibly one last quick question, because it's more about what's happening nowadays. If you can answer this very briefly. Someone is asking if you if you could be their travel agent and tell them which cities has easy access to halal food, but that's not really what I'd like you to answer. But more broadly from that question, what's the situation of Islam now? Are there lots of Muslims in China? Can we go to a big Chinese city and find mosques and find Muslims living their life there, or what?
I tell you, the good thing, from the modern today's world. On YouTube, I watched a couple in recent months. There are lots of documentaries on Muslims in China, different towns, on the mosques, on the restaurants. I saw one a couple of weeks ago. A whole town or a whole city was Muslim, somewhere south of China, southwest, I think. You find the restaurants. It's very, very beautiful area. I wish to travel there because the way that I loved it, the cleanliness, the order, the halal food, I really love it. YouTube you have to look, ignore mainstream media, ignore the things, look, search everything, whether you travel. And to know about today, you have to go yourself and you have to see the reality by yourself. Like everything that's happening today, you can only discover the truth, A, if you find it yourself, or you come across the very, very rare sources that tell you the truth about anything. Anything, I mean, any subject today. Then you make up an idea. No, but the problem I personally have, or you have, or people have, is what I mentioned many times. We don't have today a strong Muslim intellectual force that tells us the truth about anything, whether it's history, culture, China, the Crusades, or anything. We don't. We have some individuals and some institutions that tell you Al-Jazeera Arabic. I mentioned Arabic tells you some truth. MuslimHeritage.com tells you some truth. Some Muslim individuals, Professor Ghazan, but that's it. The Muslim world is dead. They don't know it, but they are dead intellectually. They are dead and buried. There is nothing. So we have to get the truth to listen to Western voices. If Western voices or Jewish voices are kind to us, they will say kind things, but if they are not, they will lie. Simple. And if they lie, it's our fault. I don't go and yell at why you Westerners writing this, why are you saying, no, they know, they don't know, nobody. Myself, I don't know all the truth. I am Muslim. I have been dealing with the subject for tens of years, 40 years, I guess. And I know barely anything. No human being can know the truth or tell you the truth about it. So it's up to Muslim to take. And here, Safiya mentioned, the Quran, this is our book, is full, it's not full of what many people could. It's full of things where it keeps telling you, why don't you think? Why don't you ponder? Why don't you know? And unfortunately, there has been a complete death of the Muslim mind. It is dead. We might pretend to know these gadgets and so on, and the glitz and the lights, but our societies are chaotic, all without exception. We live in chaotic societies, and our minds are equally chaotic. Yeah, with exceptions, obviously, some groups try to do that, but as a whole, no. Had we been as brilliant as medieval Muslims, the whole world would have converted to Islam. But if somebody steps into Muslim countries and sees trash everywhere, noise, chaos, put off, and they would hate us even more than they hated us before. Some people, Gérard Depardieu, for instance, had sympathies for Islam, but I don't think he liked what he saw when he visited.
So I think this is a good moment to stop, Dr. Salah. I know
before I say something more.
We just could go on for so long. Just listening to you is absolutely a gem of a talk. Thank you so much. I mean, what I could just conclude very, very briefly is that from everything I take is that we need more Muslims learning other languages than just English, French. We need them to learn
to write, to read
Mandarin, and to learn to read properly, and to research things. And we hope we hope that you know, we'll have more and more of this sort of generation of new scholars coming from different organizations, and how we can at baytalhikma.co.uk, Bayt Al-Hikma Productions, we are just in our very, very humble little corner, trying to contribute by putting your work more out in the public sphere. So we hope that you've all enjoyed this talk as much as I have, and looking forward to hopefully another talk maybe next year, where we'll see what Kaysra has in MACFEST, and if Allah gives us the health and life to do that. So thank you very much again to everyone for your questions, your comments, your support. Got lots of support, Dr. Salah, for your knowledge and your delivery of this talk. Many people have said that it was really fascinating and very encouraging.
I'm happy, I'm glad. Thank you to you, to MACFEST, and all those involved, and the audience as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please
My
join us
pleasure.
again next weekend for our last 2 events this year. Thank you for wonderful hosting, and yes, I'm speechless. It was so fascinating. I was just listening all the way through. So enlightening talk. Thank you so much.
I'm pleased with that. Thank you. You've done good work, and may you continue with that, inshallah. May Allah help you.
Thank you.
Well done from me, Katarzyna, an amazing talk, no doubt about it. Thank you so much, Safiya, for excellent hosting. Okay, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. See you next week, and we'll be in touch with Dr. Salah, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Alaikum salam.